Welcome, freedom loving people, to another episode of the Restricted Handling Podcast. You've got myself and Glenn, as always. We are joined today to cover all things China, intel, espionage with Nick Eftimiades. Some of you will recall us interviewing Nick on Combat Story, got close to 100,000 views, talking about his 3 decades of experience in the US government, most of it at DIA, but a true China espionage intel, military intel expert in the intel community. Nick and Glenn have at least one person in common we talked about off air that I hope we'll get on here one day. Nick, thank you so much for taking the time to join us over the holiday season.
No, thank you very much for having me again. I appreciate it.
And we'll kick off here. Nick, you are a resident China expert. Glenn and I talk a lot about Russia. We talk a lot about the Middle East, Turkey, even we've talked Latin America, but we really haven't dug into China. Given your background, the book you just published earlier this year, Chinese Espionage Operations and Tactics, this time of year, like what you're seeing over the past 6 months, is this about the normal volume of Chinese espionage or intel activity that we normally see? Is it up? Is it down? Just to ground us a little bit.
Well, first, so we don't forget it in discussion. It's interesting that you and Glenn talk Russia and other things, but are kind of light in the discussion on China because it's symptomatic of what we've seen in the IC over decades, right? In our heyday, if you will, with the Soviet Union, I mean, we probably had 5,000 people between the military and the State Department and the intel community trained up on the Soviet Union. I mean, we had Garmisch, right? A center, for teaching graduate programs on that. Nothing comparable on China ever. I mean, in most of my career, I could count the China hands, as we called ourselves, on two hands in the IC. And even though they're getting better and they're building now, it takes a generation to build that type of knowledge base. Our collection isn't spectacular in that area as well. And it is impossible to tell whether well, no, I'd say impossible. You can say in specific areas that the operational tempo of Chinese intel is increasing. And the reason I say it's difficult is because, and I have a database of now 947 or so cases, right? So I'm almost 950 cases, worldwide cases that I've had database, right? Economic espionage, covert action, theft of technologies, illegal exports. So is it now we're putting more emphasis on enforcement, or is it the number of cases are going up? So I can tell you that a couple of years ago, a think tank came out with a Safeguard Defenders came out with a report detailing 110 Chinese covert police stations all over the world, right? Right after that, you started seeing enforcement actions go up against Chinese espionage against the diaspora. So in this case, it was the FBI moving because it was publicly embarrassing. But and I know some of those cases, they knew about it for 10 years previously and didn't do anything. Is it the enforcement of it that's going up, or is it the actual action? The areas that we can see going up is clearly the espionage against the theft of semiconductors, right? Semiconductors, information technology, and aerospace technology that you can plot and biotech formulas and things like that, particularly starting since COVID, and actually before then, you can chart those as in scale going up dramatically.
What about just as one of the recent cases that we've seen with Linda's son? Lots in the news over the past year, but just this month, you have a court that appears to have been able to decide or make a judgment there on Linda's son. Can you give people an idea of who Linda is, the background, and how this fits into the larger picture?
So for those who don't know, Linda's son was a New York State employee for well over a decade. And during that time, it is alleged that she was reporting to Huang Ping. He's a Chinese consular general in New York City. And several things are alleged. So they have voice transcripts and text messages going back and forth. So there's no question that this occurred, that she was letting them listen in on official phone calls. She was modifying the state's actions and the state government, their policy towards China, sometimes unilaterally. And she was restricting Taiwan having any access to the governor. And this happened under Governor Cuomo and Governor Hochul. So she was acting and she got paid accordingly. The government details its case of her husband getting, and this is a very, very common tactic in these types of things, getting preferred business deals with the Chinese government, with Chinese provincial officials, and making millions of dollars allowing him, preferred access and preferred business dealings. In this case, exporting seafood and things like that, and importing PPE equipment during COVID. So they wound up with a 3.2 million, as a government employee and her husband, $3.2 million house in New York State, $2 million condo in Hawaii, and the government details a case of laundering millions of dollars in different directions through relatives and through front companies for, all and pretty openly in behalf of supporting policy, cutting access for Taiwan, increasing trade between New York State and China, all at the direction of the Chinese government.
So Nick, what you're saying, this was going on for what, at least 10 years?
Yeah, since 2012.
2012, it sounds like it was pretty open, like almost overt in the way that it was happening. And it wasn't caught, or people just didn't want to do anything about it.
Hiding in plain sight. Her job, part of her job is coordinating, her whole job is coordinating with the Chinese community. That included the nonprofits, the Hainan Association, I believe it was, and the Association for Returned Overseas Chinese, both of those being under the United Front Work Department in China. But her official allowed for tasking with them, rather allowed for the relationship. It also allowed for the relationship with embassy officials. So while she had this everyone knew that she had a relationship with the embassy. That wasn't a secret. What was actually being discussed and the fact that she was taking direction, that was the key. And it really is only since 2019. I mean, now bear in mind, this happened since like 2011 or 12. It's been ongoing. But 2019, a Chinese think tank comes out with a report, which they did on behalf of the United Front Work Department and with Tsinghua University, a major university in China. And it details the governors in the United States and their favorable feelings towards China, 1 through 50.
Ranks them.
Ranks them. And it says in this document that as the position towards us starts becoming harder in Washington, we need to move our efforts towards the states. And you can watch and see at that time overt attempts, letters coming up from the consulates, from the embassies to U.S. businesses, telling them to push against this legislation, to state governments, telling them the same thing, literally saying, you're not going to make any money in China if this legislation passes. You cannot make money in China with this legislation in place. So we see that happening overtly. We also see it happening in covert avenues as well. So the states, which are completely unprotected in this regard, become a primary target for China's covert influence activities.
Unprotected in the sense that they don't have the same maybe counter intel apparatus around them.
Right. They have zero. I mean, they don't have that. They don't have the mindset. They don't have an understanding. We have 263 sister city contracts between states and between cities in the United States and China. Nobody knows to go through that contract before they sign and saying, you can't mention Taiwan. You can't do this. You can't do that. You have to, nobody thinks to go through and understands this at a central planning level in China and how they're trying to manipulate cities and states to be supportive of Beijing's positions. And we see many other cases like this.
No, I just want to go back to your opening statement, which is very interesting and very true. Why didn't we grow, and why didn't we pay more attention to the PRC going back 20, 30 years? I can understand, like, by the way, I went to USARI. I'm a graduate of USARI, so I'm very, very proud of that. But there was no equivalent on the PRC side, was there? And there was
no, there's not.
The FAO program in the Army for, FAOs to work in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, was pretty robust. A lot of investment in language skills, not, area knowledge. Why didn't we invest the same way in China, in the China set? What's your assessment?
I actually have this issue now, even in discussions with INSCOM and DHS and any number of others, and they're fractured and they're pulled in a dozen different directions, and they'll get an initial level of training. Some agencies will sit there, Nick, we want you to come in for a day or two and train their people. We're not growing in-depth expertise in the CI community or many other places for that matter. I mean, there's a big exaggeration. Pockets, we are hiring a lot of people, a lot of good people, which quality time living in China, things like that. But that said, nothing compared to the expertise that we've had historically against other nation state threats. And for us, I mean, I testified before the Congress multiple times in beginning 1994. And at that time, I told them, do something about this now, because if you don't, in 20 years, you'll be calling me back crying, my God, how did it get this bad? And the simple reality that we don't do anything about it is for three reasons. There's ignorance, because we're ignorant of the CCP intentions and how they work, basically, how they incorporate a whole of society approach in their actions. There's arrogance, and Newt Gingrich said this. He had this approach that inside every Chinese person is a freedom-loving American dying to get out, and as soon as they start making money, they'll demand political freedoms. Guess what? It didn't turn out that way. So ignorance, arrogance, and greed. I mean, I have just sat in congressional offices and seen people come in and the honest ones are telling you the truth about that China's putting them up to this, but lobbying for China because everyone wants a part of pie. And no kidding, a lot of the congressional funding that they get is coming from companies that are making hundreds of millions of dollars in China. So yeah, and it just gets worse and worse. It has for 30 years. Ignorance, arrogance, and greed.
Let me pose a question to you, Glenn, if I can. I mean, you didn't retire that long ago, and you were very high up. You worked Russia, no understanding hard targets within the intel community. Would you ever chat with whoever your counterpart may have been working China, just about tradecraft or capabilities? Was there any sharing like that you would see?
Well, first, I want to say that I am also greedy and arrogant. Just so that was a little joke there, listeners, viewers. I agree with everything Nick said, and I do want to say that I had a discussion with someone about 5-6 years ago who had been very involved on the China issue in the mid 2000s, and I asked him a similar question, and he said, "Don't forget that the U.S. business community was like we were telling people there's a problem, but the U.S. business community was making money hand over fist and saying." Using their lobbying capabilities, saying, "Don't mess with what we have going on," like, and they didn't want to listen to the danger that actually, the Chinese are eventually going to replace you, and they're going to steal your technology, and they're going to basically get out ahead of you. They didn't want to hear that, so it goes back to I think the greed and maybe a little bit of the arrogance, which I saw across the board in many areas of our behavior, throughout my 34-year career, unfortunately, especially after 9/11. Actually, go back to the 90s. I mean, even when we talk about Russia and the former Soviet Union. But yes, Ryan, to your question, yeah, I mean, I was fortunate enough to have some good relations with people that were doing the China side of the house, and we spoke often. We tried to compare notes, but I think what I saw was that the press of business and the kind of demands. There wasn't going to something Nick said, I think it was before the thing.
Yeah.
We just didn't have a lot of time for strategic thinking.
Yeah.
And there was not an emphasis, especially after 9/11. In my opinion, we became very tactically focused. And we developed a mindset that, it's like go, 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 tactical, tactical, tactical. Every once in a while, some leader would try and pull people off site for a day or two to say, okay, let's try and think strategically what's coming down the road in 5 years. But then we'd get called back to the office. Oh my God, we have this happening. We have a threat happening. So I'm sure you remember what it was like, Ryan. It's,
I was going to say, it's so interesting. My whole career was I got commissioned into the Army in '02. So all I knew was the tactical, what's the next counterterrorism threat? And then in the agency, very similar. Nick, if I could we mentioned Linda's son. There's she and her husband profiting from this. But as you mentioned, like CCP intentions or strategy, how does Linda's son fit into that? And what are the higher level, like the 2 to 3 more strategic efforts by the Chinese right now?
So it's an interesting point, Glenn. You kind of highlight the lack of this on the U.S. side. China has what we call a whole of society approach, or what I call a whole of society approach towards the U.S. We see this in using the terms like unrestricted warfare and such, that they use every avenue of society that they can to advance their objectives, which happens to be, as they put it themselves, the China dream, to be on top of the world. That they want that type of dominance. And if you don't look at it with an American mindset, if you understand it from a Chinese mindset, which is a Confucian, humanistic, hierarchical society, that you're either above me or below me. There's not an equality type of thing, right? If you're a servant, you're a servant. If you're a scholar, you're a scholar, and everybody's has a pecking order and responsibilities and behavior that's expected in that. And we see that in Chinese foreign policy. No, we only want big nations discussing this. And the U.S. is, well, we kind of think everybody's equal, so everyone should be in on this. No, it's just big ones, and then we'll let the little nations in on it. So it's a different approach, and from their perspective is, moving up. To do that, you use a whole of society approach, which means, and this is where we falter, where the agency falters, wherever an agency looks at espionage, right? FBI looks at economic espionage. Customs and Department of Commerce look at illegal exports. You know how often they exchange notes and share across the board? Zero. Okay, which is why I have them calling me asking for my database. Great. And so the tradecraft that's applied across the board in each side, and you see from the state-owned enterprises, 300,000 of them. You see tradecraft applied against different technologies there. You see tradecraft by the MSS applied against intel organizations as well as technology. You see tradecraft applied by the PLA against the theft of technologies, illegal exports of technologies. Our response is fragmented. It's a nation state, individualistic agency response. Theirs is a holistic one. So they look back on a long strategic plan and say, we need to influence the states to counter the federal government. Okay, we need this type of technology to build A, B, C, D. And it's the CCP controlling that. And they control that, and all elements of society engage in it. In fact, Kissinger wrote about this in his memoirs, and he said, dealing with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it was like dealing with one great brain. Everybody kind of turned and looked at and had the same words and the same thoughts and the same arguments coming out. It didn't matter where you went, what embassy you went where. It was all like it was controlled at a central level. The great advantage in that whole of society approach is that the CCP says it, and it's executed in private industry. It's executed in academia. See a lot of it executed through academia. It's executed through the MSS. So and we don't get this, and we don't cover it in a holistic fashion. Everyone has their own little niche, and that leaves us vulnerable.
I would agree. And there's something, again, that across the board, we in my career, we struggled with the whole of government approach. We were often working at cross purposes, contradicting each other. I mean, I'll go to Nick, the case you mentioned in New York, the consul general. How long was that consul general serving in New York? Do you know?
I can't say offhand. I know I'm going to guess a solid 6 years that I can recall, and looking through the paperwork and such, but she worked with him for many years. So, let's say at least 6.
Which, Glenn, for context, that's a long time in intel.
But yeah.
Right? Just for people listening.
Yeah, I mean, our diplomats don't usually serve that long in one place. And from a counterintelligence point of view, I personally think it's not a good thing to allow someone to spend that much time in your country.
We actually had that diplomat Huang Ping popping up in other cases. So, that hasn't been released publicly yet, but I'm reading it saying, wait a minute, I remember that guy. What? So his reach goes pretty far out.
I was going to take a slight detour here and ask you, Nick, if you can just set me straight. There are a few things, as not a China expert, that I hear every now and then, and I would just like to better understand. I think we've heard Xi and the PRC state that they want to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. And I'm sure I'm getting some of the words wrong there. So you have that. I've heard President Trump state something to the effect that during a conversation, he has been told that China will not invade Taiwan on his watch. I don't know if I don't think that was ever made publicly, but I think he has said something to that effect. You have Sergei Lavrov just over the weekend saying something to indicate like their close partnership with China to help maintain their territorial integrity, which some would hear as, if China does invade Taiwan, Russia might support them, whether in word or in action. From your expertise in looking at this problem, when do you think such an invasion would happen? Is the language I just used even close to correct? I feel like I hear this in different places.
Right. Well, the reason 1927 comes into into view so much is because that's the 100th year anniversary of the People's Liberation Army. People become fixated on that. Invasion is also an American term applied for this. It's an invasion. What does that mean? I mean, could China sit there through strategic, missiles and through cyber attacks shut down electricity? How do you think the people in New Taipei are going to go for a month where they don't have any electricity? Could they economic warfare? Could they tell every company dealing with Taiwan, if you deal with them, you're not dealing with us, period? End of story. Could they blockade? Yes. I mean, all these things that they could do without an invasion. So we tend to think of it as, a one or the other. They're going to invade or not. But in China's sense, it doesn't do any good to put, troops down unless there's a domestic issue driving it, or unless there's a domestic pressure on Xi Jinping or something like that. In the meantime, keeping everyone guessing, wasting Taiwan's resources and threatening them and turning up the psychological dimensions on this, which we've seen, and then applying AI as a psychological warfare tool against Taiwan. And out of the espionage cases I have, 170 espionage cases that I have, probably 70 of them deal with Taiwan. Right. So
Yeah.
it's the intensity of the espionage activities against Taiwan. So Taiwan may crumble or fall, which is what the PRC is hoping, without firing a shot. I don't think the U.S. catches all the subtleties here. And Trump, to be frank, is a wild card in this. Because I like to use the characterization that Trump runs the country not as if it was the army, but as if it was a special ops unit, right? So it's constantly, he's getting what he's doing through disrupting things. He's getting what he wants to do through, changing, and sometimes he has to change directions completely and go a different path and things like that. But it's not the methodical long-term planning, with a goal off 10 years from now, 15, that we have. That might be the goal, but he's constantly shifting directions in response to, to different stimuli coming in and information and intel, where he's constantly moving the policy going back and forth. Drives people nuts, but that's what he's, you look at the results at the end of it, not the actions. Yeah. They don't make any sense. It's a special ops group in that sense. And if you look at that in the Taiwan situation, I mean, he just got to go to China, and didn't make any commitments and turns around and sells them $11 billion worth of weapons. It's classic, right? It immediately just clobbers China for doing that. It's great for the U.S. economy. All these things come into being. It's going to be interesting how it plays out. That stimulus that'll actually see how China will react and what it'll do with Taiwan. My guess is more along the manipulation side and those types of things.
Hey, Nick, question for you. This is a little more on the geopolitical sense, but there's a lot of discussion about the ability. Some people believe that we have an ability to pull Russia away from China. So split Moscow from Beijing, go back to the Nixon kind of Kissinger playbook. There's been some suggestion that, if we give Moscow some concessions, then we can get them to pull away from China. It's in our long-term strategic interests. China's the real threat. Russia's kind of a temporary threat, or not even really a serious threat. What do you think about that? Do you think it's possible to split Beijing and Moscow?
Yeah, I think we've been saying it since the 60s. And you know what? We're no better at it today than we were then. I mean, just period. Stop. End of this statement on the part for the U.S. We can pull. Yeah, we look, guys, 50 years of failure in this regard, and being able to do this type of geopolitical manipulation. Maybe we should add to it. Okay, we have a couple of issues that we know that are on the table that we have to deal with. We have China, its economy, and its military presence in Southeast Asia. I mean, as a primary threat. Trump is moving to kick him out of the hemisphere here. Got it. We have to consider, and truth helps in regards like this, right? The Chinese economy is not 2/3 the U.S. It's like 1/3 of the U.S. 40% of the Chinese economy is 40% of the Chinese GDP is government investment. Okay, that's hardly GDP, right? But twice that of what you have in the United States. So there are a lot of nuances that you understand, that you can get to understand and see where the real relationship is and how you can affect their behavior, which is the key thing here, right? Their behavior is all on the economy, and Russia's not buying Chinese toys, period. So as opposed to doing this again. And there's so many times that we don't do particularly well in this deception and geopolitical gamesmanship like this. I think we ought to be focused on China, deal with it and take Russia on a separate track. And I like the fact of getting Europe more engaged. What the heck? Enough. Guys, carry yourselves for a bit and letting them be a lead in areas against Russia as well.
Glenn, what's your take on that?
I personally agree. I don't think it's possible to split. And I definitely don't think making concessions to Moscow is the way to do anything. I think that's a mistake. I'm not a PRC expert, but on the Russia side, I don't see that the Russians are going to walk away. And all this talk about making big deals with Moscow, I think it's go back to the 90s and ask anybody that tried to do business in Russia then how that worked out. And then up until 2014. And I do agree with Nick. I think we should probably, I don't think we can separate the problems because there's a bit of an alliance there against us. They have common cause, but we need to have our allies and we need to pick our allies well, work with them. I also agree on the European side. I agree with President Trump. During his first term, he tried to warn the Europeans on Russia and on China. He tried to enlist their support. And in my opinion, they kind of ignored him. They were making big deals with Huawei and all these other companies. They were spending a lot of money with the Chinese. So I can understand, my assessment is that he was frustrated when he came back into office. But now, they seem to have finally gotten the message. Now's the time to reinforce that message with them and stand together with them, in my opinion. And Ryan knows, I believe that the Ukrainians are a very valuable ally in trying to deal with Russia. But I have a question for you is who do you think are the most valuable allies? If you can say that, who understands the PRC the best of our allies today or potential allies?
No question. I'll say Japan, top on the list. They really get it, and China doesn't like that, but they absolutely do. The Aussies, I give them credit for taking it on the chin a few times over the last 5, 6, 7 years for taking on the PRC. Diplomatically in global circles, standing up for what they believe is right. I wish we had been more supportive of them. It showed leadership that we should definitely emulate global. A lot of others are knuckling under to the euro or to the pound. In the case of the UK, they talk like a mighty lion, but they cave immediately for the financial benefits of working with China. The French, the Germans, and I've spoken to a lot of them, know it's a problem, but they are very, very internally weighing the economic advantages along with that. Germany might have moved a bit more towards wanting to deal with China in a little more of a strategic sense, and a lot of that is China sort of screwing up with the espionage cases that it gets caught in Germany and in the EU as well, as targeting the EU, the institution of the EU. So a lot of those cases have come out, and they're very, very directly trying to separate the EU from the United States. So I think that's been a cause for concern. If you take a look at Pew votes, at Pew opinions on China over the course of the last 5, 6, 7 years, it's COVID on, they downstreamed completely. The only place it's not is in a lot of the emerging world, Latin America and Africa in particular. But in every other place, China's viewed negatively, increasingly negatively, all over the world. The question is, people are afraid and they have to weigh that against their economic interests.
Nick, I wanted to call you 2 to 3 months ago. I should have just picked up the phone and called, but there was this case in the UK where I can't remember the exact details, but they had, I think it was some type of espionage case, Chinese nationals that cratered at the end because the UK government wouldn't maybe label China as an aggressor.
Right. That was the case of Chris Cash.
Can you give us context on what happened? Why, how could that happen with the UK?
Yeah. So what happens is the UK's law, their national security law, which was passed subsequent to these guys being arrested and charged. So they were only charged under the original law, could only be charged under the law before. And what the law says is that it has to be an enemy state in order for you to get charged with espionage. So it was Chris Cash, and the other guy's name also was Chris, I forgot his last name. But both were recruited in China. Both had been reporting on events in the parliament. Chris Cash had a conservative think tank, actually, and was getting all the parliamentary viewpoints and passing that off to China and getting paid accordingly. Same thing with the other guys. So the targets were UK Parliament. Both of them are let go because the UK is unwilling to come out publicly and says China is an enemy state. If they had come out, they could have published. They could have, and we have the same thing in Korea. The same thing in South Korea that they can't charge with espionage because the only thing that can get charged in espionage is North Korea. So you can get charged with taking photographs in an area you're not supposed to, around military bases, or getting access to things you're not supposed to, but you can't be charged with espionage unless it's going to North Korea. So that's why in my database, you got to be sort of careful on how you categorize things because the laws are different globally.
Have you seen a change in? You've mentioned this a few. We talked to Linda Sun. You talked to Chris Cash. They're the two Chinese nationals in California that were, I think, suspected of illegally moving or trying to move Nvidia chips, advanced AI
Right.
chips, including H100s. Have you seen a change in recruitment tactics, TTPs of Chinese intel over the past few years?
Actually, they did move Nvidia. They moved through Singapore, at least in one case. So the answer to your question is yes. There's no question. I actually went through the cases at one point, and somewhere around now near 600 of those cases, I was able to correlate the recruitment, the recruitment method, the equivalent of mice, right? Money, ego, coercion, and ego, money, ideology, coercion, ego. I was able to do a Chinese correlation of that and what specific recruitment techniques, what the motivations were. So as you look at that, and because of that, you start to see changes in tradecraft. So in the past few years, for military, for intelligence purposes, young and dumb has been a big focus. Meaning that they go after the ones in their early 20s who either have clearances or in time will get clearances over time. Recruitments are done online. Recruitments are done through a variety of encrypted. And in fact, the more sensitive information you get to China, you can see them moving you up a scale of COCOM, encrypted communications that they're moving you up. So it depends on the target set, and it's different. It's not only different in whether industry or government, it's it's different in the type of technology that they would go after in industry. And I'll give you an example. You find the tradecraft used in the theft of illegal export of aerospace technology is dramatically different from that in biotechnology or information technology. And that is because because you find the motivations are different. In one case, it's cash. In the other case, it's setting up a competitive business or a 1,000 talents program in China. And when those are the objectives, you get a whole list of different types of tradecraft applications that come in with them.
Nick, I have a question for you. Someone reached out on LinkedIn. They want to hire me. They think I'm a fabulous consultant capability, and somebody based out of, I think, the Philippines. What do you think? Should I respond? Okay, it's another bad joke.
Cool.
All right. By the way, they said I'm handsome, which is very suspicious.
I get a lot of Chinese women, say, "Oh, I have so much to learn from me." Sorry, if I read this correctly, you're in a construction company in Shanghai. You're 23 years old, and you have no friends on LinkedIn.
Hey.
Got it.
Nick, we're just on the cusp of 2026. What do you expect to see happen with PRC, US, Taiwan, Japan? Obviously, resurgent Japan right now. I mean, very interesting. What's in store for us in 2026 in your mind? What are you looking forward to? What are you worried about?
Well, you know what? Both are the same answer, and it's the Chinese curse. May you live in exciting times. So I expect on the economic front, and in a sense on the geopolitical front. I mean, China's going to do its only logical choice at this point, which is backpedal on the Trump administration, negotiate, delay things as much as they can, delay, delay, delay. Now we have another year before tariffs will kick in, and so they're going to get to the point where they only have to worry about him for the last 6 months of his tenure, right? So that's the plan: is to delay things as long as they can, so they're impacted as minimally as they can. Japan, on the other hand, is a bit of a wild card here. They do have populist support, and that's a big deal in Japan for a more resurgent Japan, which worries China. And then,
Yeah.
I mean, they have very long memories about that. So I think it's going to be a dynamic situation. Japan is likely, 13,000 companies, Japanese companies are working in China now, but they're moving out, a lot of them. So I think that's going to continue. I think U.S. companies, the worse the geopolitical situation gets, the more the four tigers, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, are going to prosper because the labor rates are about a third of what they are in China. The more investment that's going to go there and move out of China, the more that's going to impact China's domestic economy. So that tends to ratchet up stress within the nature of the relationship. And the more stress there's in a geopolitical relationship, the more likely, it's a self-feeding problem set, right? The more people are afraid, the more people are looking for geopolitical analysis, the more they want to, okay, I'm not going to put another 40 million into this. I'm not going to be Walmart and have 100,000 facilities over the place. I need to start ratcheting down. So it's going to be a very, very dynamic, changing, stressful geopolitical environment. And anyone who tells you any more than that, what they know is going to happen is ridiculous. I mean, you know, you don't know. I mean, the way things are going to go at this point, China doesn't know, right? They're in the middle of it, and they haven't figured it out.
Well, I did want to ask Nick, there's been a lot of talk about the Chinese buying land in the United States, strategically located real estate. Is that something that people that listen to this program should pay attention to and be very, very aware of? I know some states are taking some action now to limit that.
Well, let me give you kind of two answers. Number one is they buy land out in the middle of nowhere, near military bases. Well, the reason military bases are in the middle of nowhere is for the same reason. It's cheap, right? I mean, land is cheap, and China has a problem that they only have 15% arable land. Okay, which means they've got to import food, even though they export some levels of food, seafood, and things like that. They're going to be an importer no matter what. It doesn't matter the circumstances that you change. They've got to survive. They have to import. It's why they claim the South China Sea. 70% of the world's seafood is consumed in Asia. And guess what? They have a middle class now, a growing middle class. So, forget about the precedents. Oh, a Chinese explorer was here. No, they've got to feed their population, period. That's why, it's that and the natural gas resources. So if you're a Chinese business person and you think about this, they're going to be importing food no matter what, agricultural products. So this is where I suspect the investment opportunity is. And that's why I think that people are coming over, investing in cheap land. They'll start turning that, and they'll have a sustainable income that'll only go up, and preferred investment programs going into China, preferred export going into China. So that's number one. On the other hand, we've seen in Toulouse, France, a person who was running an aerospace company who did Duan Chung, I think her name was, and within the past 2 years, who had an antenna at this basically abandoned property, vacant property, and pointing against some of the French aerospace satellites and sucking down their data. And when the cops went in, they saw a whole setup of her sucking down the data, and she had to compete a small aerospace companies. The possibility for espionage, absolutely. I'm more concerned about the strategic implications of them, having that pipeline of food, of agriculture from the U.S. than anything else.
And the UK government, I think, is trying to figure out if they're going to allow the Chinese to place their new embassy somewhere in the heart of London. I think that's another discussion going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about that, and it lies on top of communications lines that go into London's financial districts. It's a massive facility, and I mean, as I said at the program, what are they going to do?
Has a nice view to Big Ben. I think it has a nice view to our embassy, actually.
Nick, thank you so much for taking the time with us. This was fascinating. I'm so glad we got you on here. Hopefully you'll spend some time with us again in the future. People can check out your book. We'll have description links so they can find you and your books specifically, but the newest one you just published. So thank you so much, Nick.
Great. Happy to be here, guys. And a very nice conversation. Happy to have had it. This should be our New Year's Eve conversation. We get the champagne and it's
That's
a discussion on Chinese espionage. I might put that online and see who bites for it.
Actually, while we were talking, I got a message from the Chinese embassy. They said they'll send the champagne and a thumb drive. And a thumb drive, sir.
along with roast duck that they did for Linda's son.
I saw that. Yes. Thanks for listening and being a part of the RH community. Would you like to receive the same daily intel brief that Glenn and I read? You can get it for free at restrictedhandling.com. We've curated what we consider to be the most relevant and reputable sources on all things international security, geopolitics, military and intel ops, and economics and sanctions, focused exclusively on Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and the Middle East, to include accompanying podcasts for Russia, China, economics, and spy stories. Just head to restrictedhandling.com, enter your email, and you'll get the daily briefs that Glenn and I both read, and you can leave comments and questions that we can respond to. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe.